Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind. And it's a privilege and rare honor for me to be interacting with all of you on behalf of Punekar News, which has given us this wonderful platform. And today, my guest is Colonel Ajay Singh, retired, who's written this wonderful book on the Russia Ukraine war and its global implications. Ajay, can you hold up the book if you have the
Yeah, sure. I
copy?
have a copy
Yeah,
of that here.
yeah. Must show everybody the cover, That's, I think
This is the
yeah.
copy of the book.
Yeah, this is the cover of the book, and as I'm told, the book is doing wonderfully well on the online platform. Already crossed over 1,200 copies, so it's a great achievement for Ajay. And as you all know, a little bit of background about Ajay. Ajay and I go back a long way. We first met each other in 1980. We are coursemates, and both were commissioned into the Armored Corps. I'm Ajay was joined 83 Armored Regiment, subsequently went to 12 Armored Regiment, and then commanded 88 Armored Regiment, and we were COs together in Hisar. So we go back a long way, old friends, old colleagues. But what is amazing about Ajay is how he's evolved after the army. He always had this in him, the poet, as we used to refer to it, the poet and the author. And after the army, he's really blossomed. He's been speaking at multiple forums, addressing both within the military, put back a lot into the army after he's left, addressed very many courses in higher command and senior command, Army War College, and speaking in multiple forums. And he written 6 books. This, of course, is a sixth book. And out of the others, I'm sure you all would have read Through Orphaned Eyes. That was fiction. And his non-fiction book, India's Battles from Kurukshetra to Balakot, again, is something which I recommend all of you must read. It's really a wonderful account of everything. And he covers the essence of all those battles and where we went right and where we went wrong. So it's something to learn from history. So today our focus is on what has been the focus for the last 347 days. I think that's where
Yes,
we are today. Huh?
1 year to the war is coming up on the 24th.
Nearly 1 year. So we're at 340s, I think, 347, nearly
Just
approaching
20 days
350.
more to go for the countdown.
Yeah, exactly. And the Russian Ukraine war. And that's what we're going to talk about. And as I always tell people, the last couple of years, we've seen 4 strategic shocks, which has actually affected the way we all live. And to just recount them, I won't go into the details. First was COVID. Then you had the issue in the China India standoff in Galwan. The relations are still frosty. There have been multiple talks, but again, we are in a, you can say, where our positions are frozen as of date. Nobody's gone, the further steps of confidence building haven't materialized to the extent we thought they would. Then was the US exit from Afghanistan, and you're seeing that fallout, what is happening in Pakistan today. A void was created. The world is still, getting used to to the conflict in Syria and what is happening in the Middle East. And after that, you had this huge incident, which was known as, to term in Vladimir Putin's word, a special operation in Ukraine. And that literally changed. It has plunged the world deeper into a new great game. We have entered a era of persistent volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Multi-domain warfare, gray zone conflicts, use of technology are the new drivers of strategic brinkmanship and power play. Uh, Therefore, Ajay's book has examined the Ukraine crisis in the light of these events, and what appeared to start as a swift Russian, what I called a special operation, to run over Ukraine, much as Russia had run over certain other countries in the past. Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, Georgia 2008, and Crimea in 2014. But this campaign has become a long drawn out military campaign, and it's now nearly a year with currently no end in sight. Though in my writings, I've said that winter was the time to push for peace, but that push is not taking place, and you're seeing the opposite happening, where there's a push for rearming Ukraine with offensive weapons now. Did the war begin in February last year, or are the origins dated back over scores of time? I think Ajay will talk to us about that. Did the events lie in the disintegration of the USSR or the Soviet Union? Uh, but this conflict does present a unique case study on each element of the state employed in the various forms: diplomacy, coercion, war fighting, and its consequences across the globe. You've seen how nuclear, the use of nuclear weapons had literally been turned on its head. Nuclear weapons were considered a deterrent, and Admiral Vijay Shankar, in his brilliant piece, argued how they've turned it on its head and used nuclear weapons to further their conflict, to further their offensive ability, to further their offensive designs. Now, for many years, various people have, analysts all over the world have been saying that large militaries are redundant. There are other means to win wars: economic, information, digital, asymmetric. That would be the new norm. And the aspiration on war fighting forces was now a bygone era. Militaries were relegated and were seen just as deterrents, as an instrument of last resort after all efforts of statecraft failed, rarely, if ever, to be employed. Today, you've seen absolute the opposite taking place. Militaries are being rearmed, retrained, refocused, and the militaries are involved for over 1 year now. Nuclear deterrence I've talked about. This war has unleashed massive global disruption in the economical and financial system. These days, with this intertwined globalization, everyone felt globalization would act like a protective shield and prevent any conflicts. We are seeing that in spite of this protective shield, uh, there are conflicts taking place. And I think I'll touch on that with Ajay later on. So there's food insecurity, existing energy equation you've talked about in Europe, strength of disruptive military technologies, and massive human displacement with the refugees. So, if it ends today, even if it ends today, it will take years for Ukraine to be rebuilt. And who will pay for that rebuilding? That's the moot point. So, as I said, the Ukraine war offers a fascinating case study. And this book, this wonderful book, has, looked into all these aspects and gone into these details. And I'm sure Ajay will tell us
Yeah.
more about this as we get along. So, to start with, Ajay, how did you draw the line of when to end what you were looking at and start writing the book? Logically, it should have been the winter, and when the winter came, then you
Yes.
should have decided to look
You
at the
know,
book.
Jagat, you hit the nail on the head when you said that it has been a year to the war and no sign of ending. We're counting the first anniversary. Honestly, when we began writing the book, the thought was like most people thought the war is going to be ending in about first 14 days, then maybe 3 months at the most. Then we thought October, November by the most is going to finish off. By the time we had written most of the book, and in October, the Ukrainians launched the counterattack. By end November, there was no sign of the war ever ending. And now it looks like the war is going to continue not just all of 23, but maybe even beyond. I have often drawn parallels with the Second World War, in which it continued with periods of heightened activity, reduced activity, but the war continued for years. And the cutoff line which was selected was around mid November, in which the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive. Snows came in, the front kind of stabilized. If
Absolutely.
you take a look at it, the actions after that, there have been actions by the Russians. They have moved to Bakhmut, they have captured Soledar, the Ukraine have launched a small offensive, but it's basically low level offensive. Now, the next phase will begin in spring. In all probability, around March is the period when it will restart again. That is when the next phase of offensive will take place, and that's when I will have to redo my book and add those aspects to it.
No, no, no. You don't have to redo what you've written. You have to add on to what you've written because,
Absolutely.
the moving finger writes and having
Absolutely.
writ moves on. And
Mm,
that's exactly what's happened. Nobody can pull the clock back.
yeah,
So, I mean,
mm,
so now we'll just come on to that.
yeah.
If they want to pull the clock back, where do they want to go? What are the positions?
Yes,
Will anybody accept that?
yes, yes. Where do both parties, Jagat, that's a super question. Where do both parties want to go now?
Yeah.
Look at where they, for that, let's understand where they are right now. Russia, contrary to what the West is expecting us to believe, is not too badly off. They have taken over 20%, 17% now with the of Ukraine counteroffensive of the four richest regions of Ukraine: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. They have amalgamated that in their own through that fake referendum which they held. After that, the Ukrainian counteroffensive was a brilliant offensive, but they have taken over just about 7 to 9,000 square kilometers, while the Russians have already occupied 2 lakh square kilometers. Now, when they talk about both sides are talking about peace, but what is the basic demand? The Ukrainians say Russia must vacate each inch of a soil. Russia says we will negotiate provided the territories we've occupied are our own. That's non negotiable. So there is no common ground. That means there's no ground for peace talks to really start. So now, how I look at it is both sides are going to consolidate. Russia will consolidate along the river line, maybe the Dnieper River in the south, and perhaps the Iske River in the north, in the Donetsk province. And they'll hold on to the line. And like the Donbass war, which went on from 2014 and is continuing even now, this will be a kind of a frozen conflict which simmers indefinitely.
Yeah, but like most generals who go in for any offensive, they have an end state in mind. So, what do you
Yes,
perceive was the end state, which
yes.
and they work towards that end state. So, what was the end
Listen.
state Vladimir Putin had in mind, or what was the end state he would have
Yes,
asked his
yes,
commanders to,
yes.
achieve?
I think the end state which you had in mind would be the capture of Kiev, the removal of the political leadership, and the capture of all these areas. When the Kiev offensive failed, and believe me, it came within an inch of success. They were very
Yeah,
close.
in fact, Ajay, I'd like to ask you about that famous, para
Kiev.
landing at
Yeah,
Holst.
I will tell you. I will tell you about that. But about the end state, that would be
Yeah,
his end state. Now he could not get it because the window closed. So the end state he's now looking at is the eastern areas and the southern areas of Ukraine is what they are going to hold on. They will hold on and absorb it in a fait accompli in the same manner they took over Crimea in 2014. And the situation will hold that. That's what he's looking at. The end state which Zelensky is looking at is that ideally Russia is pushed beyond the borders to the pre February boundaries. And in the best case scenario, they even have to vacate the Crimea. How do I see it in the midst of all this? I think I mean, Russia has to vacate the soil they have taken over. It's not a legal or a right thing to be done to occupy another nation's territory. But a face saving formula that could be worked out is Russia vacates the area back to its February boundaries, but is allowed to keep Crimea. That may be a solution which is acceptable to both sides.
yeah, but there's a sharp division within Ukraine also. There's Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking,
Yes,
Orthodox Church versus the Catholic. So, there's
correct?
a division within Ukraine. And
Right.
Ukraine, as you have also pointed out in your book, has been the area, like, you can talk about it, equate it with India, Punjab, where all the invaders has come into India from that
Yes,
region.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So everybody, be it Napoleon has come in, the Germans have come in. So everybody is come in, but they were all defeated by the Russian winter and they fell back. This time in the winter, they've just been a frozen conflict, so to say. And we've
it's
seen, disparate group, I mean, mercenary groups, I'll call
like
them, like the
Wagner's.
Wagners, you know, being pushed to achieve the Russian aims, whereas the Russian troops are getting consolidating in that manner. So, I mean, this is something that
Yes.
I'd like your comments about.
About winter and the coming winter now?
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
winter's nearly over now. So,
Yes.
where do
So
you think?
now,
What do you
okay, now,
think has happened in this winter? Will they have they been
ye-
able to
yes.
carry out their rearming?
In winter, both sides have consolidated in a
Okay.
nutshell. And they've consolidated well. They have not moved. But as you know, Jagat, you've commanded an armored division. The preparation is the most important part of any offensive. Russia has mobilized its 2 lakh odd reservists. Its front lines have been beefed up. They've actually prepared defenses along the areas they've held. It's a trenches. It's a, like they call it. It's been a system of trench akin to the First World War, which they have prepared in the area they have captured. Ukraine is consolidating for a counter-offensive to retake maximum area. They have also got almost 1 lakh reservists, of which 60 to 80,000 have been freshly trained in USA and UK and have joined the Ukrainian ranks. They have got new equipment, and now if they get the 310 tanks equivalent to almost an armored division which they are looking for, if that comes along with air and air defense, their offensive capabilities will have increased tremendously. So how does one see it? One sees that both sides are getting ready for an offensive. Will the Russian offensive come first? If it does, where will it come? I think it'll be Kiev. Will the Ukraine offensive come first? If so, where will it come? I think it'll come in the south, most probably towards Mariupol or something like this. But this winter has been the winter of consolidation, and spring will let us know the effects of that consolidation on both sides.
So that is right. But intelligence, they'll be studying all their maps, they'll be studying all the inputs as to where the perceived weaknesses are. And like wonderfully got out of that, matador scape. They'll show
Yeah.
something, act somewhere else. That came out beautifully in your book about the,
Thanks. Thank you.
yeah, Ukrainian counteroffensive. But, back to the point, what you just touched upon, 310 tanks. Now, what is the time frame for these tanks to come in? How long does it take to train them? How do manage three different varieties of tanks? They're the Leopard 2, they're the
Challengers.
M1A2 Abrahams, and then their Challengers. Out of these, two are not in production. The Leopard 2 has not been produced for a while. The Challengers have not been produced for even longer. The Challengers have huge maintenance problems. Their guns may be all 120 mm. Two are, what do you call smooth bore. One is rifled. The fuel differences are there. The heavy fuel amount, the weight problems are there, and sophisticated equipment, small things which are not talked about, which you and I are very familiar with. How do you talk to each
Terrific.
other if the
Terrific.
communication systems
Terrific.
are different? How do you
Terrific.
integrate the Russian
Yeah.
equipment with this? So, 12, 14 tanks of coming in Challenger 2, uh, 31 M1A2 Abrahams, and you're saying so many leopards. Initially, only I think I mean now Germany has agreed to allow the other countries to supply leopards. So that's happening. But at the same time, Norway is also asking for tanks, to in case there's a threat over there. So I mean, there's a whole lot of things. The tank was considered, dead at the beginning of the conflict. Today, it's back at center stage. And what I've always been arguing about, you just can't write off a weapon system that has firepower, mobility, and protection, and has the ability to hold and to seize and hold ground. I mean, it just analysts just push you in different directions and say that NLAWs and javelins rule the day. But these are all problems. Having been commanded an armored regiment, educate people about the training it takes to ban these tanks,
You
and
know,
how long do you
Jagat,
think the
Jagat,
conversion
yes,
will take?
yes, yes. Now, we all know the three different kind of systems: the Leopard 2, the Challenger 2, and the Abrahams, which are The Abrams is notoriously sophisticated, the gas guzzler, difficult to maintain everything. You have command armor division. We all know the problems of training and familiarizing a crew with a particular equipment. So that problem of three different families of equipment will be there. The logistic problems will be immense, tremendous. But the way one looks at it, the Leopard 2 is the T-72 of the West. A good, rugged, efficient tank, easy to operate, easy to move and maneuver, which I think will be the workhorse of the Ukrainian tank fleet for some time to come.
I
The,
don't think they'd like to compare it to the T-72. They may,
they may,
T-90
yes,
may be better.
yes, maybe you're right. Okay, okay, let's call it.
Yeah,
No, no, I'm talking in terms
yeah,
of being a
if not
workhorse. Like,
T-40 Armata, but I mean,
rugged. We know we have both operated in Russian equipment. We know they are good, strong, rugged, unsophisticated equipment. But the Challenger 2, and more than that, the Abrahams. They say the Abrahams is such a gas guzzler with its turbine, it requires a mammoth logistic chain behind it. But they are going to use it like how we do it. Something say maybe like Arjun's to give an example. Use it in selective areas. Maybe don't move it extensively. Use it in a defensive role. Use it in small areas. They will circumvent that problem. But even then, to use it would take them anything between, to use them effectively rather, would take them 4 to 6 months of training, coordination, and integration.
yeah, I agree with you. We have our own case study when we went into East Pakistan, that time in Bangladesh, and we realized that we had to mix equipment because the PT 76s were extremely light, very thinly protected, and their gun was a 76 at that time. And that had the ability to move cross country to the riverine terrain, whereas the T-55s were the one with had the firepower, they had the protection, but they couldn't leave the ground. So some units were quickly converted to T-55s. One unit, in particular, 63 cavalry,
Yeah.
and they were the ones which were mixed with the PT-76s
Yes.
of. There was a mix between units, 69 armored regiment and 45 cavalry and these tanks of 63 cavalry, and that's how they you know outflanked and punched
Correct.
through and created that. But it took time for the conversion to take place. You've also converted a unit, you know exactly how long it takes.
I would say optimally 2 training cycles.
Yeah,
Optimally.
yeah, I mean, once you train the chat, then it's down to zeroing the weapons, getting integrated, firing with everybody else, being part of these, offensive maneuvers. So there are various steps involved. But like you say, placing them in a place, hoping that their deterrent value, their firepower, their protection, they are slated to have a very superior protection in the form of Chobam armor, which can, literally prevent any penetration. But still, a long red penetrator coming at you at 1600 meters per second is not an easy thing to argue against. Okay, so Ajay, now next thing, yeah, you can just tell us a little bit of what you feel were the decisive battles in this
Okay.
campaign, and
Okay.
yeah, where we went right and where they went wrong, and what
Okay.
lessons we can draw from that.
Okay. If you take a look at the way the campaign has evolved over the past 1 year, you can see it's got 3 distinct phases. The first phase began on the 24th of February when the Russians launched their attack into Ukraine. And that time, the thrust went in the north towards Kiev. That was the focus. And they felt if they captured Kiev very fast, which they could have done in the first 3 days of the war. Remember, Kiev, the airfield of Hostomel, north of Kiev, was attacked 3 hours at 8 in the morning after war broke out. The fact that they could not do so and were pushed beyond Kiev marked the end of phase one, around say third, fourth week of March or so. That is when the Russians also moved and consolidated in the area of the south and the east. And those 3 months in which they slowly made slow grinding progress in the Donbass, in the south, when they captured Mariupol, Melitopol, and the other coastal towns, those 3 to 4 months till around September, say I would say March, April to September, was, I would say, the Russian grind. And then in October till around November, the war took a very decisive turn when the Ukrainians launched their own counteroffensive, both in the northeast and in the south. The areas which the Ukrainians took over, approximately 7,000 square kilometers, gave them actually an edge, not because of the amount of area they captured, but the manner in which they did it. By having done it so fast, and frankly, the Ukraine counteroffensive was a very good counteroffensive. By having done it so fast, they actually put the Russians on the back foot and led the world community to believe that Ukraine, yes, they can win this war. So, when the front stabilized in winter, like we brought out in the earlier questions, we are now at a stage where though Russia holds the upper hand, they are still on the back foot because they're realizing the problems that occupying a territory and holding on to it are two different things.
Yeah, you're very correctly brought out. Occupation is one thing, retaining that territory is another thing. There's a huge problem of fighting in built up areas which are emerging now. And these problems are, which need to be studied by all countries now as to how do we deal. And built up areas are increasing. There's increasing urbanization, which is taking place. How do we maneuver through these areas? It's a different thing, Abraham's maneuvering through the deserts in Iraq, but a different thing, the T-72s negotiating built-up areas in Ukraine.
You
There's
know
no template.
something? Yes, but when you look at the campaigns, most, or in fact, virtually 70% of the major battles were built up areas.
Yeah,
And if you take a look at it, mechanized forces per force had to operate in the built up areas. And
that's
so,
the new
yes,
norm. That's
yes,
the
and they operated very well. And the equipment of choice on both sides has been that beautiful BMP-2,
yes,
which raced into the center of the town. It was standard tactics. The armor would come in, make a kind of a thunder run through it. They would be followed by the BMP to rush. Troops would disembark, seize key points. The BMP would provide the fire support, and from the center of the town, they would expand outwards. Now, these tactics of built up fighting in built up areas, I think all armies have to be for a conventional war. The way the world has changed now, it is not the nice open desert and plains which most tankmen are comfortable fighting in, which is going to be the battleground. It is these, the built up areas, where we have to be prepared to operate
absolutely. And talking of the BMP-2, that's why there's a huge clamor for the Bradley and the what they call the
in.
what
Orders,
we call the ICVs, the infantry combat vehicles.
yes.
All over everybody, Ukraine is asking for that. So now I come on to the next question. Do, what is the role of the West? How do you see the role of the West, and particularly
Hmm,
US and NATO? Uh,
wonderful.
are they being responsible in arming them, or should they have been more responsible in
Wonderful.
preventing the conflict?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question, Jagat. In my book, you yourself have written this chapter on NATO and the war, a super chapter which you have written, right? And you yourself have brought out that the war began because NATO did not understand Russia's sensibilities, in spite of the fact that they were warned by luminaries like Henry Kissinger, who said that if NATO comes too close to Russia, they will respond as a threat to their national security. Now, look at you're talking about NATO and the West. What is the cause of the war? The cause of the war is the fact that NATO had expanded 1,000 kilometers eastwards towards Russia after the Soviet Union disintegrated. And when Ukraine in 2018, I beg your pardon, 2019, when Zelensky took over, he said he had it enshrined in his constitution that Ukraine shall aspire to join NATO and the European Union. Putin responded, "What is he doing? Doesn't he see that after this we have no place behind to go? NATO missiles will be able to hit Moscow in 3 to 4 minutes. The offensive weaponry will be on our borders." Their security perceptions, I would say, was justified. I don't justify the aggression, yes, but their security perception, I would feel, was justified.
So that's
You-
very well put across. I
Yeah,
don't justify the aggression, but the security perception was
yes,
justified.
is
Absolutely right.
correct. Correct.
Yeah,
Now, the other thing is now, if you remember, there were a lot of jokes and all floating about now of Ukraine wanting to join NATO, and then the minute Russia attacks, suddenly NATO says, no, you can't join it. You know, a lot of these cartoons were going on about how you take a look at it. When Ukraine wanted to join NATO and they went to war because of it, NATO has not directly stepped up to help Ukraine as yet. They
no,
are
the
giving
minute
them no, they're giving them listen, they're giving mammoth influx of weaponry and equipment. And as some of them put it, as I don't mind, they are willing to fight Russia till the last Ukrainian. But have they
absolutely.
have they taken any step, a basic step, like imposing a no-fly zone over Kiev in the initial stages of the war? They could have done that, but they were not even willing to take that chance. They were willing to let Ukraine prolong the fight. I use the word prolong the fight by equipping them, allowing them to continue the battle without suffering any huge loss of life themselves. What had they lost? Nothing much. They have given equipment which was old and mothballed. The US has given what they some mammoth amounts of aid, all right. But beyond that, they have suffered no loss of life or limb, or even economically, the cost is manageable.
Yeah, because in your book also you talk the minute NATO enters this conflict, it will be a World War III.
And
But
yes,
it's one of the scenarios you mentioned at the end,
yes,
the
yes,
possible scenarios. So I don't think NATO or the West is willing to take that chance.
yes,
But so what
yes.
they're doing is they're using Ukraine as a proxy, and
All right.
they're arming them to the best ability they have. And yes, they're pouring billions of dollars into it. But I had was part of a very interesting discussion about 2 weeks ago, where there was a person who was a former CIA officer who spoke, and he said that the roots of this conflict even go back to 1996, when
Right.
President Clinton was, had to face his election, and he decided that one of the ways to win votes was to win the East European votes. And at that time, he allowed Hungary and all these other countries, which were former Soviet Union countries, to come into NATO. And
Correct.
at that time, there was a lady, I think her name was Newland, who was in Ukraine, and she was the one who was fermenting a lot of this trouble and the uprisings against the previous regime, and all those revolutions that you saw and all that were actually given him from actually fueled by America at that time. So I wonder what you have to say about this.
Yes, of course. Of course. You see, if you take a look at it, when they started getting NATO, getting the Eastern European nations to join NATO, it was just setting the foundations for a war, and they had been warned about it. Let me tell you one more thing. Russia wanted to join NATO. They said,
Absolutely, Yeltsin wanted to join
yes.
NATO. Putin had also put it
And he was
across.
told that they said, yes, there's no reason why you cannot join NATO. It would have become a
Yeah,
European, a Western alliance.
yeah, they wanted it. Logically, what Russia said was that we've dismantled Warsaw Pact. Now you
Correct.
dismantle NATO, and you have a collective European
Yeah.
security
Huh.
pact in place. I think that was what was discussed at that time. Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, now we've discussed the land domain for quite a while. So tell me something about the importance of the Black Sea in the overall matrix as far as Russia is concerned, and why did they fear? A lot of people say that they held on to, they had to take Crimea because of Sevastopol and their Black Sea fleet being there, and they also want to cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, and for them, a red line is positioning of a NATO fleet in the Black Sea. So, can you
Correct.
tell us something about
Yes.
this?
Well,
Yeah,
I am not
and
a naval
Commodore
guy.
AJ Singh has written a
Commodore
wonderful piece
Ajay
on.
Singh, who has written this superb chapter on the book on the
Yeah,
naval aspects, has brought it out beautifully.
yeah,
What he has stated, he said, and he states, he said the war is not about the land, the war is about control of the Black Sea. The
yeah,
Crimean Peninsula is all about control of the Black Sea and then access to the Mediterranean thereafter. And if you take a look at it, they're right. The Crimea gives whichever force controls the Crimea controls both the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. That's the reason why the Russians took it. Right? Now, when they've taken the entire coastline on the south of Ukraine, Ukraine is left with only one port intact, Odessa, the most important port. But they can export nothing through Odessa as long as Russia controls the Black Sea. So, in a nutshell, by taking over the coastal areas, they have throttled Ukraine and made it a landlocked nation. They cannot export anything. They had to have a deal with Russia to export its wheat. So, can you
yeah. The
imagine?
grain export.
Yes, the Black Sea deal, as they call it. So they have the Russia can throttle. They cannot send their grain or their minerals by rail because the Ukrainians have got the meter gauge. I beg your pardon, they got the broad gauge, and the West follows the medium gauge, the meter gauge. So wheat and all going across Ukraine will have to be transshipped, taken out and put into different trains. All the logistic problems are there. By Russia controlling the Black Sea, they have throttled Ukraine. And I think the overall aim of the campaign is just this, that they continue retaining control of the Black Sea and the areas adjoining it.
Yeah, okay. So now talking of the seas and the areas adjoining it, suddenly you see Sweden and heading towards, you know, NATO. So what do you say about Sweden and Finland wanting to join
See,
NATO?
again,
That
in this,
border will increase. They will
yes,
block off the access to the Baltic Sea.
yes,
So
yes,
Russia gets this, loses
yes,
that.
correct.
And
So,
more important is what nobody's talked about is the access to the Arctic, which is going to be the
correct,
next battleground.
correct. Now, Jagat, you got a super thing, super points. Now, Sweden and Finland wanting to join NATO is just the classical example of Putin's gamble having backfired. He hoped to weaken NATO. No, he's not done it. He's conversely strengthened it by his aggression, which has scared the smaller nations. So when Sweden and Finland join it, the length of the border adjoining Russia, NATO's border adjoining Russia, will more than double. Plus, they will be able to control the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad and the Baltic Sea. So, Russia, by this, like I said, I do not condone the aggression, but I do understand the security concerns. Their aggression has backfired by scaring other nations into joining an alliance which they hope to weaken. And
Yeah.
as far of the other aspect of the Arctic Sea ice melting, now that will be to Russia's benefit because that will give them a direct route to China and Asia in which they don't have to go through the Atlantic at all. It'll shorten the distance by almost one third. And that would be to their benefit. But as we know, that'll take about 10 to 20 years to come about.
Yeah, okay. We'll come to China a little later. I've got a question for you
Okay.
on China. But before that, land, sea, and now air. So, has the
Eh,
Air Force, yeah, been part and parcel of this, or have they
yes,
been restrained in their
I,
activity?
I
And
think,
why has the Russian Air Force not
yeah,
controlled
yeah,
the
yeah,
Ukrainian sea
yeah.
airspace like we did
You
over
know,
East
this
Pakistan?
is one of the mysteries of the war, which we hope will come about once the war is over. If you take a look at it, the headline which I've given in the chapter on the air war was, "But where is the Russian Air Force?"
Absolutely. So where is the
Because
Russian air?
where is it? I mean, you have an air force which has got the top of the line fighters, your Sukhoi 35s, you got your MiGs. Where are they? Only the Sukhoi 25s, the ground attack fighters were brought into play. Their attack helicopters were brought into play. Why were the air superiority resources, their electronic warfare aircraft, not utilized? The fact that the Russians did not exercise get air supremacy is one of the reasons why the offensive stalled in the manner they did. And to be very honest, why have they done it? Like I brought out to you, this is one of the mysteries of the war, which will only come about once people start speaking from the Russian side after the war is over. But one of the largest Russian blunders was the inability to control Ukrainian airspace.
Okay, now we've talked of the land, we've talked of the air, we've talked of maritime. So before we switch over to something else, just briefly, what are the important lessons that have emerged as far as this conflict is concerned? Lessons
Wow.
for the military. Yeah,
Oh, this is interesting. Firstly, it is the biggest lesson is that the new concepts of war, as we brought about, the next war is going to be a short, swift war, restricted in time and space because of the global economics, etc. I think there'll be no less than about 20,000 articles written on that, and I'm guilty of writing a few myself. That theory is now being debunked. It has,
absolutely. That's what I talked about initially. I said everyone felt this
yeah,
globalization was like a protective
yes,
shield and that
no,
would prevent a conflict. And it was almost like a nuclear weapon where you had nuclear mad, mutually assured destruction.
correct,
So if
correct,
US pulls out of China, US suffers even greater
correct.
than China. So
It suddenly we did discover that no, it makes no difference. I mean, the
yeah,
war's gone on for 1 year, a full-blooded war between two nations involving the complete national power.
yeah,
So it means your production lines, your war fighting mechanism has to be geared to once again developing the capabilities to fight a long conventional war with the industrial and the economic infrastructure to back it up. I think
yeah,
this is
but
the first lesson of the war.
yeah, but look at the amount of expense that will take if you gear up, to fight a long conventional war. And uh, one of the reasons which led to the collapse of the Soviet Union at that time was the spiraling defense
Correct,
expenditure. Now,
correct,
the reverse is
correct,
happening.
correct.
Europe is being forced to spend a lot on
Yes,
defense, and the Europeans, so to say, had got used to a very comfortable lifestyle. I think they had the best,
yes,
standard of living in the globe. So suddenly they're being confronted with hard choices. So
yes. Let me give you
there's
another
some,
side of the coin. It is like the Ukrainians decided that they did not want nuclear weapons and they gave them all willingly across. They did not spend on their defense budget, and the price they paid for their lack of preparedness was much more than the price they would have paid had they got their basic defensive layout in
no,
place.
that's again a thing I've written about this. That today the nuclear weapons, you, it will lead to a race for countries to acquire nuclear weapons as
Yes,
a deterrent. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in anybody's mind. Now, initially you mentioned this point, about uh, uh, NATO and US holding back. NATO
yes.
and US could have said that we will give you the nuclear umbrella. They've never even mentioned that. They've not told Ukraine they'll give them a nuclear
But
umbrella.
I think that was the right move.
Yeah,
by
that was
not
a right.
by not raising the nuclear stakes and by
Yeah,
moderating their own rhetoric, they helped
yeah,
diffuse the situation. That might have
yeah,
heightened the situation. They were very
yeah.
wise on their part.
Yeah. No, no,
Yeah.
that is there, but I'm just saying that, which step are they taking forward? Okay, so one is this point very well brought out, no short wars. I mean, that's what we've all been used to hearing. So, in light of this, what we achieved in 1971 is something remarkable, and I don't think it can be replicated
Oh yes.
easily.
Oh
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, another thing that has come out in a lot of writings and a lot of studies of the war is there's no longer any safe sanctuary in modern warfare. The enemy can strike throughout the operational and strategic depth, and that's exactly what is witnessed. So you have
Yes.
this huge amount of ability to strike precision targets. You have the huge amount of ability to get intelligence, and you're tracking things non-stop. So it's very difficult to conceal yourself on the battlefield. You may conceal an intention, but to conceal your physical locations and your
True.
movements is
I
becoming
understand.
increasingly
So
difficult.
what it implies, Jagatbir, is the fact that our doctrines, which hinge so much on attaining surprise, should now shift, because surprise is going to get increasingly difficult in this age of transparency. It should shift to deception. And the Ukrainians demonstrated it so beautifully in their own offensive. They knew the Russians would have got intelligence of their troop movement, the tank movement. So rather than conceal the intentions and they attain surprise, they just deceived them by having showing greater action in the southern sector when they actually meant business in the northeast. Deception now, I think, would have predominance over surprise.
Okay, next thing is the importance of precision weapons. And you've seen targeting by precision weapons throughout the
Correct.
winter, targeting critical
Correct.
infrastructure. Yeah,
Correct.
so can you tell us about this?
You know something, like now it seems like it is precision munitions which are proved far more effective than those huge massive ground busting salvos with the Russians have resorted to. I mean, they may be 10 times more expensive, but in terms of logistics, effectiveness, everything else, precision weapons are far more effective than dumb munitions. That I remember there was an article by General Raj Shukla, the former army commander, who mentioned that the future we had the scale of dumb munitions versus precision munition was 10 is to 1. It should now drop to 1 is to 4 actually, if
Yeah,
we are
but
to
there's
get
a huge cost involved. There's a huge
huge
cost
cost.
involved.
But like it
Yeah,
was been completely bought out, the effectiveness of this more expensive weaponry, like the HIMARS have proved, is more cost effective than having mammoth arsenals of dumb ammunition when you have got maybe a salvo of precision munition doing the same thing.
yeah,
So
I
that is
agree with
something
you over there. I agree with you, and these are able to target things.
yes,
And there was that huge precision strike which they picked up from the mobiles of, you know,
absolutely. They killed
yeah, and they
hundreds of
targeted.
folks, yes. You know, there's
Yeah,
another lesson that comes out in the war, Jagatbir. It is the manner in which social media and the humble mobile is used. Information warfare has been used in this war.
yeah.
The manner in which
Also, the way drones have been used, by pizza
drones,
delivery
you have
drones
taken
have
the
been
words
used.
out. You have taken the words out of my mouth. When you're talking about the expensiveness of precision munitions, one, low technology, which is gives you the biggest bang for the buck, is drones.
Yeah, and they're using far more expensive weapons to bring down the drone.
Destroy one and the Ukrainians have proved the Russians have gone back to using drones. Now they bought as you know, they bought those suicide drones from Iran. But the Ukrainians, they used drones so beautifully in the initial days of the war. They even used drones which were used for pizza delivery, and drones were
Yeah,
used by Amazon to drop their uh, goods to different households. They fitted them with cameras. The delivery boys who manned those drones became drone operators. The cameras became the eyes and the ears for the Ukrainian forces. And this cheap drone identified incoming enemy, while strike drones were used to destroy them. Drone technology, robotics is one of the major lessons of this war.
no, that is a major lesson. That there's no doubt about that. So now, quickly, Ajay, what about China? What has China's role in this been, and how do you equate Russia, Ukraine, and China and Taiwan, and what
Terrific.
lessons
Terrific.
stand out for Taiwan?
Terrific.
in
and
this case?
India,
Do you
most
think
importantly,
the
India.
West will rush?
Yeah.
Yeah, and India.
See, this war, I mean, there is no doubt Russia, Putin and Xi Jinping were hand in glove for this. Putin had visited Beijing for the Beijing Olympics on the 10th of February, exactly 2 weeks before the war broke out. And in all fairness, they would have discussed his impending plans to have got his tacit go ahead, if nothing else. China has not actively supported like they said, they're not supporting the war, but they have supported Russia's position and its security perceptions. China and Russia are bound by one common philosophy, which is the fact that the West is actually determined to pull the two of them down to ensure that Western supremacy. So that is a common bonding that will get them together. Now, had Russia attained his aims in Ukraine relatively easily, had NATO crumbled and the Western alliance had just kind of moved back and allowed Putin to have his way, it would have given a very strong signal to China and Xi Jinping, especially, that they could try a similar thing with Taiwan and get away with it. The very
Absolutely. I think
fact,
you,
yeah,
yeah,
the very fact that Putin's army has suffered a bloody nose, and in the long run, Russia will be the loser in this war. I don't mean militarily, but I'm talking about the international prestige, standing, economically, everything. When China realizes that the world's unity has stood strong, aggression has not been condoned, their own actions may temper down a little bit. Which brings us to, paradoxically, another point. China may not go all out for Taiwan, but will it test the waters in other arenas like the line of actual control? They may be tempted to do that. And seeing the
yeah. So you saw
psychology,
what happened at Yangtze
yes,
recently. You saw what happened in Galwan
yes,
before the conflict. I think
yes,
we are prepared for that and we're
yes,
adequately poised as far as our forces are concerned. We're adequately equipped. So, I mean, this is there.
yeah,
Okay, now another point that came up, and this is what the West was feeling from earlier, that, sanctions can deter war, but sanctions are unlikely to prevent or stop any military aggression. Everybody
right.
felt that, put this sanction and all that against, like they've done against Iran, they did it. They wanted to replicate it against Russia, but sanctions haven't been able to prevent a war. What are your opinion on that?
It shows where it's like the article in the book, which I call it a toothless bite of sanctions.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And if you take a look, see, sanctions cannot work unless the whole world is in sync. Secondly, sanctions cannot be imposed by a country or a group of countries unilaterally. It is like you're imposing a writ. The sanctions against Russia have not worked simply because the oil and gas continued flowing into Europe till as late as October, till they finally awoke in December that we should impose a price cap on Russia, while they had been buying 50% more oil than India had been buying in that same period.
Yeah. So,
So,
like you're
similarly,
saying, the
yeah, I
ruble
would
has
say
strengthened. The
the
dollar and
ruble
ruble are the two currencies that have strengthened.
other
Everybody else has weakened.
now again take a look at it. Yes, today I read that Russia and China, to circumvent the SWIFT system of banking, which Russia had been excluded from, they have begun their own banking system. India and Russia are in talk to have rupee ruble trade.
Absolutely.
Iran and Russia are in talks to have real ruble trade, which, if you ask me, is a very good thing. Why should they be the dollar currency which is predominant? So, sanctions, I would say, have not really been effective at all. On the contrary, it has strengthened the country which is being sanctioned against.
Yeah. So, General Gerasimov, who's now in charge of the whole conflict, had in 2016 said In the 21st century, we have witnessed a progressive blurring of the boundaries between states of war and states of peace. The difference between strategic, operational, and tactical levels, as well as between offensive and defensive operations, are blurring. So, what do you have to say about this? Is it bearing out in this conflict?
Yes. But that, if you ask me, always the case. The offensive and the defensive phases were always merged into each other. All forms of war fighting, including the hybrid form of war fighting which is being followed now, was always the name of the game right from the beginning. Today, if the Russians are using the Wagner group, India, if you pardon my using this term, was utilizing the Mukti Bahini equally effective in 1971. The Pakistanis were exploiting the Razakars equally effectively. So all these forms of war fighting which you are seeing in Russia has been utilized since time immemorial and will continue to do so. The only thing this war has done is it's shaken up misperceptions of the fact that the 21st century is going to be the century of peace.
Okay. So today, where we stand on day 347, yesterday we had a prisoner of war exchange. I think there were
Yeah,
163 Ukrainians and 90 something Russians who were, and all through UAE. So there are some positive indicators also from that. But what are the scenarios now? Where do you feel you painted five scenarios in your book? Can
right,
you just
right.
run through them for the
Okay,
viewers?
okay. So let's go one by one. Okay, one scenario is Russia wins, outright victory. By that I mean not only do they retain the area they've got, but they also take over Kiev and Ukraine capitulates. Possibility, I would say at this juncture, unlikely. Because now, after so many years after a year of battle, I don't think they're in a position to have that complete military victory which they set out a year ago. If it does, Russia will become so strengthened that the neighboring nations then would be a threat, so the West would not allow it. Option two, Ukraine attains a complete military victory. By that I mean they push the Russians out of the entire area they occupied, and by doing so, also push them out of Crimea. Again, I would say rather unlikely because though they have the offensive capabilities to retake that area, which is now been strongly fortified and held with their best troops, will be a little difficult. If it does, it may provoke Russia into taking the Armageddon option. Option three is NATO comes into the war. Perhaps because of a limited nuclear strike or something by Russia, or by an inadvertent attack by a Russian missile into a NATO nation or something like this, which then can threaten to go out of control into World War III. But the most like, and I would say when I say World War III, I mean involving China as well. But the most likely option, the way I look at it, is a frozen conflict in a continual state of stalemate, something like the line of control between India and Pakistan. I look at it the fact that whatever the Russians would have occupied now, they will hold on to. Whatever the Ukrainians hold, they will hold on to. There will be continual minor level attacks and artillery skirmishes going on, like it went on in India, Pakistan, between the both sides. And the line dividing the two it already exists. It's called the line of contact between Ukrainian and the Russian forces. This line of contact existed since 2014. I think this line of contact will solidify and it will become the fait accompli of the future.
Okay, thanks. I think that was wonderfully put across. Quick question on something which is dominating everybody's mind these days, and that is strategic communication. Has
Right.
Ukraine won the war of perception? And is the world mostly privy to the Ukraine perception
Absolutely.
of this perspective of this war? and how have they gone about this? I think that's something you have to give Ukrainian success about.
The first question I would have answered in one word, yes. Of course they won the
Yes,
war of perception,
yeah,
right?
of course,
You know,
yeah,
but how have they
undoubtedly.
gone, but how they have they gone about it different. Now, to win the war of perception, firstly, your message has to be the correct one. And like I said, I condone I can understand the Russian security perspective, but nobody can condone that aggression. So the message of it being the aggrieved nation attacked by a foreign power is a message they could successfully convince most of the world about, and rightly so. The other thing is they had the bulk of the world media with them, each the platform. I watch Russia TV very often. I follow Russian channels. They are not as effective. They are largely in Russian and in the local languages. They are not as effective as the Ukrainians are. The other thing is the manner in which civil infrastructure, like the Starlink's communication channels of Elon Musk, have been utilized. These
Yeah, there's
things,
been a lot of private,
yes, private industry came to
public,
help Ukraine.
yeah.
They helped them out. And also, you must remember, Zelensky himself was a television personality. He is very savvy with social media. Though at 9 o'clock briefing, which he gives every night when he comes on television, on YouTube, and across the world, has been the most instrumental factor in sending the message across. And he did it very well with that camouflage t shirt, camouflage dress, and things like this, the correct background. All this was very scientifically designed. But yes, the Ukrainians got the message across better for the simple reason that theirs was, I would not say the most saleable message, but was, I would say, the correct message.
Okay, thank you, Ajay. That was really wonderful interacting with you. I think we've discussed a whole range of issues. And, what stands out is that the idea before the war was that a major country could be controlled without force and without the use of force. I think that's fallen on its head. A huge amount of lessons which have emerged for all of us, which are important for deterring and preventing any future conflict, and if necessary, even fighting one. And there's also a lesson of how many things in war can go unpredictably wrong, as the Germans always said that no plan survives contact. I think that's
Guaranteed.
come out even with so much, and also that nuclear weapons do matter, and we've seen that. So, wish the book even greater readership, is all I could say. It's a wonderful book. I hope more people read this because I think it's written from a very balanced perspective, balanced view, not taking sides as such, bringing out the nuances of the campaign extremely well. My compliments to you, Ajay, once
Thank
again
you.
for
Thank
pulling
you.
another masterpiece out. And
Thank
it's
you,
been
brother.
wonderful talking to you. And thank you. I thank all the viewers for listening to us. And I thank Punekar Time News for giving us this opportunity to discuss this book. Thank you
Thank
and
you,
Jai Hind.
Jagat. It's been such a pleasure interacting with you, and a special thanks to Punekar News and the entire audience. I truly hope they've enjoyed this.